Hi, I'm SJ, and welcome to Little Red Notebook's Take a Seat series, a series of short conversations with neurodiverse trailblazers. In this episode, we're joined by Erin Jackson, Operations Manager at Smart Recovery Australia. Erin lives with diagnosed ADHD. Hi, Erin, take a seat.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful, and it's so great to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for welcoming me.
Let's start off by telling us about Smart Recovery Australia.
Yeah, sure. So, Smart Recovery Australia is a mutual aid support service group. We train people in organisations, frontline community services like the Salvation Army, Mission Australia, the Buttery, and also volunteers to facilitate mutual peer support meetings. So, this is not just individual substance abuse behaviours like you might see with other support services, but this is talking about all types of behaviours of concern. So whether that's alcohol, drugs, gambling, porn, vaping. So the premise of Smart Recovery is that anybody that has a behaviour that they're interested in changing can come to these meetings and get support from the peers.
I imagine it's quite an exciting place to work in. Even considering the topic. What attracted you to Smart?
I've been on a really interesting journey in the last 6 months career-wise. I spent the last 20 years in the corporate media space working in digital ad tech, and I'd been planning a career transition for maybe the last 2 or 3 years, a long-term plan to move into an organization and a role that aligned more with my values. Um, and I had this plan mapped out, and that plan was blown up very quickly when I was made redundant in November last year. I thought, oh, I'll just start having a look to see what's out there on ethicaljobs.com.au, rather than going to Seek and trying to find a role that was the same as the role I was in. I loved media. And I loved my team, and the type of work I did was interesting and ever changing. But it wasn't something that was going to take me through to retirement. And I found the Smart Recovery role, reading the job description. It was really aligned with my skill set that was transferable from the corporate space into the community sector in terms of technology platforms and that thought leadership in that sense. But the Smart Recovery ethos of being science-based and inclusive of all types of behaviours and all types of life stages really, really appealed to me. I'm a very, well, I'm just going to be blunt about this, a very atheist, secular individual who believes strongly in science. So I've always sort of noticed from afar the gap that AA and NA can leave, and the exclusion of people who don't necessarily subscribe to that type of spirituality. So reading what Smart Recovery was about, it just grabbed me immediately. And the recruitment process was a really interesting one for me, because at the same time, what I would have called, or did call at the time, my dream job at an organisation named Jarwin came up. The Jarwin organisation had an immense impact on my own professional and personal life when I did their program, and a role in Sydney came up. So I was interviewing for both of these roles at the same time. And I was like, Jarwin, this is meant to be. Like, this is fate. I can't believe this regional director job's come up in Sydney. This is incredible. And then as the days went by and I had more conversations with April, the CEO of Smart Recovery, my mind just wouldn't let it go that this was the place that I was supposed to be. April is an incredible leader with compassion and immense intelligence, enormous brain capacity, which anybody who knows them or is watching this will probably understand very well. They move really fast, and that suits me really well. And a lot of the guests that you've had on have already talked about fast brain. And that can be a blessing, and it can also be a curse in the workplace. And if we're talking about somewhere like Qantas, where everything moves at snail's pace, working under a CEO that was decisive but also extremely person-centered. It just was a no-brainer. So eventually that decision became really easy for me, that smart recovery was where I was supposed to be.
Yeah, you mentioned Qantas because that's where you were previously. What was the one thing that was different between the two organisations? You talked about the snail pace versus the fast pace, but what else was it that really, really engaged you and still engages you?
Psychological safety, hands down.
Wow.
I did not have that at Qantas from an organizational standpoint, and that's immensely difficult to achieve in an organization with 25,000 people. It's not the same as our team at Smart Recovery, where we have that opportunity. And I felt a lot of psychological safety with my own team, the team that I managed, because I built that trust and that dynamic with them over time. But in terms of the management and the structure and the politics of the business, I'm not good at that, because I like to work logically. I like to understand why. And I like to learn and move forward. And because the politics is so prevalent there, and I didn't really realize this until I'd left the organization, that the imposter syndrome that I feel and the anxiety that I feel was compounded by the uncertainty of why the decisions were being made. And it's kind of, again, it's inevitable in an organization like that, that of course I'm not going to have complete transparency on everything. But the motives of so many different diverse operators with strong thoughts and opinions on how we should run our business created a lot of uncertainty for me. And I never felt like I fit into the organizational structure from a leadership standpoint. I was there to support my team. I was heavily focused on my team because I knew that's the part that I could control.
Let's talk about your ADHD. Tell
Sure.
us about it.
Well, okay. My diagnosis came in 2021. So COVID was an incredibly difficult time for me, as it was for many people. Leading a team in an airline with a grounded fleet during a pandemic that none of us had ever experienced anything like that before. I worked within the Qantas loyalty business unit, which meant that while the entire airline marketing team was stood down, the loyalty business unit, we were responsible for keeping the money coming in. So there was a lot of pressure on the leaders of that part of the business as well, and on me having 12 people in my care, and trying to make sure that I do the right thing by them and not just protect their jobs, but make sure that we're moving forward as a team realistically, and making sure that they understood that the decisions that I made were made collaboratively in consultation with them where it was possible, with the best interests of people's careers and people's mental health in mind. So I really struggled with that a lot. And I don't think I realized the immense impact it had on me until a couple of years later. But during that time, uh, I was like a caged animal is probably the best way to explain it. Even though we had our 5K radius up in DY, and I was very, very lucky that the water was in that 5K radius and that I could run and walk and be outside. But eventually I woke up one morning, as is my impulsive behavior, and said to my partner, I think we need to leave Sydney. I think we need to leave. So we left. And I went to Queensland and got a referral for a psychologist and a psychiatrist. I went to chat with the psychiatrist and he said, "Oh, have you got your school reports?" No, I'm 43 years old. I grew up in the 80s. They're not digitized. I wouldn't have a clue. My father's passed away. My mother has dementia. So the conversation with parents about what I was like in school. So these are diagnosis methods that
Yeah.
psychiatrists use to determine ADHD. Neither of those were an option. And I should be open that I had a deep mistrust of psychiatrists. My mother has many, many years of deep suffering with mental illness. And part of that suffering was because of the types of treatment that she was given, the non-holistic treatment. It was all medicated. So whatever the psychiatrist said to me, I still would have probably not believed him anyway. So I went and did the psychometric testing with a psychologist. So doing, computer tests and stuff like that. It was an incredibly expensive and time-consuming exercise. And once I got that diagnosis, I still didn't believe it. Not because I feel ashamed of any sort of neurodiverse status, but because I thought, maybe it's just me being a bit shit. Maybe it's just me being a bit lazy. And I still struggle with that all the time. So had my diagnosis, 18 months it took me to get into a psychiatrist when I came back to Sydney to talk about what the treatment options were. I'd started psychology in the meantime and I got some benefit from that. But I really wanted to see, and one of the best ways to test what that ADHD kind of looks like from a chemical perspective is trialing medication. So I finally got into a psychiatrist after 3 referrals, the first 2 closed books, second one, 6 months wait. It is an extremely expensive, exhausting and demoralizing process sometimes. I don't know what the answer to that is for the Australian healthcare system, but it doesn't surprise me that so many people self-diagnose or just don't diagnose. I'm come from a position of I have a lot of time on my hand and I don't have children or big financial or family responsibilities. So even me getting the diagnosis, if it's that much of a struggle for me, then it's going to be really difficult for everybody else. So I went to have a chat to the psychiatrist and I trialed Vyvanse for 8 days. I made it before I had to call in an emergency with my psychiatrist and say, I'm not sleeping. I'm absolutely unable to switch off. I was working nonstop for 10 hours a day, not eating properly. I would have to put my laptop in my cupboard to make sure I stopped. And it was causing me physical damage in terms of shoulder pain and stuff like that. But I was also bloody exhausted. So obviously I stopped the Vyvanse. He put me off work for 2 weeks. And the first thought I had when I got that medical certificate was like, the first thing I actually Googled was, can you still work if you have a medical certificate? And I sort of stepped outside of myself. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you work in ad tech. You're not a surgeon. No one's going to die. You're not that important that you can't go and take a break. So I did. I got a one-way ticket to Cairns. Said to my partner, I need to go and unburn out, recuperate, recharge, and I'll be back when I've done that. So that it was only 4 nights in Cairns that I had on Winyami, Green Island, a place where there is nothing to do except be on this little island and chill out, snorkel. That is my meditation, is snorkeling. So I did that, and then I came home with the clarity of mind on how I wanted to move forward. And since then, July 2023, I've been putting those plans into firm action.
How has working at Smart helped you with your ADHD, or has it helped you with your ADHD?
Yeah, it absolutely has. And it comes back to that psychological safety piece. Working in other organizations, I felt like I had to be hyper vigilant about making sure that my tendencies didn't impact my professional life. Whereas at Smart, it's not so much having to suppress or manage or overcome those tendencies, which is what I went to therapy for in the first place. I went to my psychologist and I said, I need to know how to fix these things. And the biggest realization, and I think Tanya touched on this, was that they're not fixable things. I'm not going to cure my overthinking. I'm probably not going to cure my insomnia. What I can do is learn how to manage it and learn how to accept it. and not beat myself up because I can't overcome this part, or this inherent part that I've now learned to harness. So being in smart recovery with the openness about neurodiversity and mental health, and they go hand in hand, obviously, has really helped me reflect back on other roles I've had where I didn't have that psychological safety, and my imposter syndrome was off the hook. I was constantly thinking, people just think you're in this role because you got lucky, or like, yeah, you're smart, but I don't know if you really should be in that role. And I just thought, well, it's probably true. But being at Smart Recovery is a far higher pressure role than I've ever had in the corporate space. You have the protection of layers and layers and layers of hierarchy and bureaucracy in the corporate world, and that goes with agency holding groups as well, advertising agency holding groups, which was the bulk of my other part of my corporate career.
You raise an interesting point, and that's that thing about, we feel like we have to hide and not be seen, but you're saying that in this role you're more exposed because it's a smaller team, a smaller organization.
So while the pressure is much higher, and obviously in community space the pay is much lower, my imposter syndrome is also much lower because I don't have all of this uncertainty, politics, maneuvering happening. We are all in the organization working towards the same goal. And that goal is to provide services for the community. It's very clear cut. There's nothing to be gained from people catering to selfish ulterior motives or ladder climbing, that sort of stuff. So when I look at these challenges I have at Smart Recovery, and when I go into decision making within very, very short timeframes, when I started my role, I had to negotiate our biggest tech contract and make decisions on that in the first 2 weeks, I think, of my role. And if that was in another space, I would have thought, oh my God, I'm going to stuff this up. I'm going to make the wrong decision. I probably would have pushed back on my leaders and said, I can't, this is way too early for me to be making this decision. But the environment that's being created at Smart Recovery gave me the confidence to know and to feel in myself, actually, this is one of my strengths. Analytical decision making at a rapid pace is one of my strengths, and I can do this. And I did do it. And the recommendation that I came back with at that very early part of my role, I look back on that decision and it was the right decision. We made the right decision in terms of how we utilize this particular piece of tech. And looking back at historical patterns or behaviors or successes of myself is the best way for me to manage that imposter syndrome, to say, what data do we have to tell you that actually you're not capable of this, or you don't deserve this? Actually none. So yeah, it's been an absolute game changer for me.
You describe yourself as and you mentioned it earlier, you describe yourself as a thought leader. What are you thinking about at present?
In terms of a professional?
Wherever you want to take it.
And I think about vulnerability a lot when it comes to both my personal life and my professional life. And I think the zero deficit framework for this conversation is a really good example of the complexities of vulnerability. Committing to a zero deficit framework conversation, I think, is an act of vulnerability in itself.
It is, yeah.
And especially for women who by and large are used to minimizing and downplaying their achievements and caveating and crediting other people, which is often quite warranted, for their achievements, rather than just saying, this is what I did and this is what I'm good at. But there's always the but. So I made my notes last night and I was like, I'm good at this because of this tendency, but this. And I went through and I deleted all of them because I reread the framework being zero deficit. And I'm like, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about this part, the good part, not the bad part. And that's really challenging for me. And it makes me feel anxious that I'm taking up too much space and that people are going to think you just got lucky, like don't get too excited about
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah, you're good, but you're not that good. And I don't know if people are thinking, oh, it doesn't really matter. But that's what happens in my brain.
Yeah. And I can empathize with that because it happens to me frequently. And I love the way you talk about that zero deficit. It's really not about talking yourself up. It's about just reframing the narrative, isn't it?
Exactly. And the watching the other guests talk about their own experiences, that was an act of vulnerability as well. And that's a gift to me.
Yeah.
I resonate and I feel a sense of belonging and I feel a sense of comfort when I hear, these ladies talking about the same challenges that I've had. So for me, this vulnerability isn't just about being authentic as myself. Unfortunately, I am whether I like it or not. That is one of my strong tendencies, that I don't have a filter. But yeah, that vulnerability is so important for all of us to understand ourselves and find our place. If we all act like everything is perfect and we're only focusing on the good parts.
You mentioned that that your focus is to enhance your involvement in reconciliation, truth telling, and the promotion of First Nations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I have a deep, deep love for this land that we call Australia. I've always been that way, not from a patriotic sense necessarily, but from a place of real gratitude. Even from a very young age, I was very aware and grateful for how lucky we are to live in Australia for so many reasons. Not just for, the education system and the healthcare system and those sort of, those important life things, but also the diversity of the country that we are so fortunate to travel on, and the diversity of the people here. I always say you don't need to have a passport to see the most beautiful places in the world. And at the moment, if I didn't get to go overseas, ever again, I'd be okay because I love this country. And loving this country means all of it. And the journey that I've been on over the last few years has been extremely confronting. It's like having been in a relationship with someone that you really, really love, and then suddenly uncovering all of the less beautiful parts of this country. So my interest in First Nations culture, in Aboriginal spirituality, and ways of connecting to country grew organically through my love of all things Australia, and through my interest in arts and culture, so theatre, sculpture, anything. I just like being immersed in Australian culture, and Aboriginal culture is such an important part of that. And it makes me so sad that we've lost so much of that gift, and that we continue to lose so much of that gift. In terms of what my interest in reconciliation and allyship is, it's about contributing to the community that I'm in a positive way, and whether that's my work community, my sports community, or Australia at large. And I think the best way I can have a positive impact in my community in Australia is to learn and understand and to continue to love this country the way that I do, but with the knowledge, with the true knowledge of what the history and what the challenges that we still face are.
Now, I find that the connection with land, spirit, the animals, especially, when I go hiking and things like that, really, really assist me and really allow me to connect my autism with, with these experiences. how does your ADHD, is there a connection between the two from your point of view?
100%. And from traveling and seeing new parts of Australia, going to new countries in Australia has really really crystallized that in my head. Connection to specific places is a really important part of my life. I fall in love with places the way I fall in love with people, or, bakery treats. So I have really strong pull towards certain places: Kunani, Mount Wellington in Hobart, Jelligle in Burleigh, Burleigh Head National Park, La Perouse down at Cape Banks. There's places that when I get there, I feel a sense of peace and grounding. And it doesn't necessarily have to be somewhere completely remote. It can be anywhere. I really love going to Mrs. Macquarie's chair as often as I can. But getting outside and disconnecting with man-made spaces is what's really important to me. I'm not a meditator, and I'm not a yogi, but my meditation comes, as I mentioned to you earlier, snorkeling, being on or in, or preferably under the water where I can, is very grounding for me. I've had to work really hard to understand what my healthy coping strategies are, and I sort of was thinking, why don't I like meditating? Why don't I like yoga? I'm like, this is fucking boring. But I understand the science behind breath work and stuff like that. So snorkeling is a great example of that. The breath work is there, but there is a type of stimulation that is healthy, and sort of distant. When I'm snorkeling, I'm looking, I'm enjoying, I'm watching and being there, but I'm still meditating at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because we often think we have to go into these structured environments and these structured activities, um, to really find that connection, and as you say, to breathe. For me, it's grabbing my stick, which I have a very strong spiritual connection with, because we found each other in the bush. And whenever I grab that stick and we go into nature and we connect with spirits and land, it just takes me into another world. It's kind of like a medicine in a way. I don't want to call it that, but it's so cathartic. But it kind of, yeah, it allows me to breathe, but also to see things within myself. And I want to, excuse me, I want to touch onto one aspect of, you talk about water and the importance of water. And you're a mermaid.
I am a mermaid. Yes, I still feel weird saying that, but yes, I am a PADI certified mermaid. It's not really just what I do, it is what I do now, but I guess it's always been who I am. I didn't really understand that connection to water because I didn't know that it wasn't normal. But growing up, we grew up in the country 5 hours from the ocean, so I'm a freshwater mermaid. It's not just about ocean for me, it's about water in general, and that feeling I get, the feeling of being weightless, the movement through water. It just feels like it takes a lot of pressure off my soul,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm in the water or when I'm watching the water. So I do a lot of whale watching down at La Perouse on the cliff. So it just, yeah, it lifts that pressure, both physically sometimes if I'm injured from training too much or something, and mentally, definitely.
Have you got a photo of you as a mermaid?
I do have a photo. I have a lot of photos of me as a mermaid. This is my office, and my I call it my princess tower that I'm in at the moment, which is a shrine to all the really important parts of my life. And if we get an opportunity, we'll talk more about, celebrating yourself and how important I think that is. But yes, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. There's a bit of reflection there. That is me. in my mermaid tail. My mermaid
Oh, that's
name is
gorgeous.
Daryl. So I mermaid down at the ocean in calm waters, in pools when I can. I'm not allowed to mermaid in public pools because someone did something silly in America once and now it's banned for everybody.
Oh,
But as often as I can in different places, it's for me, it's the ultimate culmination of my love of water and of all things aerial. So I love aerial arts, trapeze, trampoline, aerial yoga, that sort of stuff. So it brings them both together of movement, and water in the most beautiful way.
what's the one thing you'd love to change to make the world better?
Oh gosh.
Huh.
The one thing I would like to change to make the world better. Um, I'll probably come up with a much better answer in 2 hours' time and I'll have to write it on my phone. But one thing that has helped me enormously in my life with my mental health, my self-esteem, is that concept of generous assumptions. So it's a Brené Brown introduced concept, and it's talking about making the most generous assumption of somebody else's behavior that you can, rather than immediately drawing the worst conclusion about that person's motives for acting that way. And that has a twofold impact for me. One of those is I need to remain optimistic and I need to remain hopeful that there is good in people and in this world. And if I make generous assumptions about people's behavior when I am impacted by it in a negative way, or I see something that is challenging to watch unfold, I have to believe that it's not everybody going with malicious or ill intent. And the second part of that is it helps me manage my RSD. So rejection sensitivity dysphoria has been a really big journey for me to work through. And the generous assumptions concept really helped me to understand that I am not the center of every person's story. If my friend doesn't write back to my message, or I get a different energy, neurodiverse people, you would know this as well, pick up on energy very deeply. It's
Yeah.
not a nice thing to happen sometimes, but what I've learned is, okay, that's cool, I can pick up on that energy. Do I need to make that about me, and do I need to start sitting there thinking about what I've done wrong? No, I'm making a generous assumption that this probably has nothing to do with me, and if it does have something to do with me, it's not my responsibility to guess. It's the person's responsibility to tell me if there's something that I've done that needs to be discussed. And otherwise, I'm going from the assumption that everything's sweet with us, but maybe this person needs some space, or maybe they're having a hard day. So generous assumptions. I think if there was more of that in the world, then maybe we could all move together in a more harmonious and happy way.
It's a wonderful note to finish on, Erin. It's been wonderful talking to you, hearing your story, and I really appreciate you sharing with us and exposing, your world to us, because it's an amazing world that you live in, and it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. It's been a very cathartic process for me as well. And hopefully it might help, somebody else think of some things like that too.
Wonderful. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.